Welcome to the iHemp Hour, hosted by iHemp Michigan and MITech News. iHemp Michigan's goal is to educate, inform, and promote the research, development, and cultivation of industrial hemp in Michigan. We are committed to the whole plant success of industrial hemp, and it begins with the farmer. Happy to talk to Crop Scout Christy and Jason McCausey. Crop Scout Christie is going to educate us about soil health, and Jason is going to talk about security. At this time, let's take it over to Mike Brennan of MITech News.
Hey, well, thanks very much, Dave. I just want to mention a few things. MITech News, and we also have MI Marijuana Report, where we put a lot of hemp news in there as well. But I wanted to mention, too, that Governor Whitmer has had a news conference where she's been talking about the lockdown, and there have been some changes in there for the positive. She, for instance, are going to allow anybody that does outdoor sorts of things, golfing, landscaping, anything related to outdoors, of course, hemp farming. As long as you take safety precautions, keep 6 feet between everyone, wear masks and gloves, then no problem, you can do it. Again, in other businesses, is if you have curbside delivery or people can drive up and pick up whatever it is you're selling, then they can open as well. So, but the lockdown for the rest of us, or at least to maintain what we've been doing, now has been moved to May 15th, and then she'll reevaluate at that time. She and a doctor that was on the show did say that the disease curve has been flattening, it's plateauing, which is good news. And then we'll just see what happens on May 15th. But let me introduce Blaine now, Blaine Bechtold, who is the legislative liaison for iHemp Michigan. And Blaine, why don't you introduce our next guest?
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dave. So the next guest is going to be Jason McCausey. He's with the McCausey Investigation Group. They've done over 40 years of combined experience in loss prevention, investigation, safety, and environmental programs. The McCausey Investigation Group, LLC, has been active in the cannabis and hemp industry for 2 years and has pioneered loss prevention, investigation, resolution services, and secured companies, including employee theft investigation and inventory control and branding, protecting your brand. So, Jason, we're looking forward to all you're going to tell us about security for the hemp markets coming up.
All right. Yeah, what we're going to cover today is just some basic loss prevention investigation models that we provide for the past couple of years. Just a little background with myself. I have over 20 years in loss prevention, physical security, investigations, and safety environmental experience. That has been through different corporate entities across the country. 4 years ago, me and my business partner, Sam Reichman, who's the director of investigations for the firm, decided to branch out and provide our services to businesses across the country and up in Canada. So when you think about us, we are more of a loss prevention, investigations, and we also provide safety and environmental solutions for many businesses. But our real forte is around forensic interviewing. And what I mean by forensic interviewing is when you guys have somebody that you suspect might be committing theft from your specific business, we will actually go in, we will conduct the interview. And what makes us different compared to law enforcement, a lot of businesses just want to turn it over to law enforcement. The problem with that is you're just getting the theft that they committed that you have them on. Where we come in, we can actually gain additional admissions. We can identify when it first started, and we can identify as far as how large of a scope is this? How many employees does it involve? Does it involve anybody outside of the business? And from there, we can develop the admission. We put everything together, and from there, we turn it over to law enforcement. And where that helps you is we issue a civil demand to these individuals, and civil demand is basically a penalty for the theft that they cost your business, and they have to, each state is a little different as far as the dollar values on what an employee has to pay, but typically it's around $500. So that's $500 in your pocket, and that's to basically cover the losses that they may have incurred, to cover our services, things along those lines. And we also issue restitution. We will go retrieve the product. We will, if they made any monetary value on the product, we'll go ahead and retrieve that for you in conjunction with law enforcement. And where it really helps you guys is our success rate in retrieving and getting restitution from these individuals is around 80%. And with law enforcement, it's anywhere between 30 to 40% if you get the product back, if you're compensated monetarily from the individual. 9 times out of 10, they issue a plea bargain and the issue goes away from there. So with us, we want to recoup all the losses that you guys incurred through any specific theft, identify how large of a scope it is as far as the theft, embezzlement, and from there, identify any other criminal wrongdoing. Another area that we provide are very sophisticated background checks. We actually just signed on with the most modern and advanced platform known as IDI. And this actually allows us to not only look at the individual, but we can take a look at family members as well, any known acquaintances that may have any type of felonies that they associate with. And from there, you can make a decision from a hiring standpoint, is this person worth the risk? For example, we were doing a background check for a retail business, for a cannabis retail business out in Flint. And this individual hired us. He wanted us to be part of all the background checks, pre-employment screenings, things along those lines. We found out that his roommate was convicted of drug trafficking at one time, and he had several other drug offenses. The business owner said, well, it doesn't really impact, or it doesn't really show where the individual that I want to hire, where he's committed any type of felonies, misdemeanors that might prevent him from being hired. So I'm like, obviously we're just a messenger. We relay the information. He decided to hire this individual. 45 days later, he's calling us to interview him. And him and his roommate were basically selling product from this individual's retail business. He also had a large cultivation center, and he was taking, when he was working in the cultivation center, he was also taking product from there. And they were actually transporting it over state lines as well, selling it. So from there it becomes a federal issue. So the total omission in that case was well over $20,000. So that's just a little insight on how our background checks can give you visibility into not only the individual that you might be hiring or that you might be doing work with, but it can also give you an idea who are they associating with that might be an issue from a theft and integrity standpoint. We also conduct site surveys. We'll go out to your property, we'll go out to your business, we'll conduct a very thorough site survey. We'll identify any areas that might be susceptible to loss. And we'll also identify the most effective technology that you can use, from camera systems to access control to whatever you might need. We work with several great vendors across the Midwest, and they have great technology, but their prices are extremely affordable as well. So, and one of the bigger ones that companies have really started utilizing us for is GPS countermeasures. We have a full investigative team that if you have any issues in the cargo process where product is going out, product could potentially be stolen, we actually have field investigators that utilize GPS countermeasures, and we also do field surveillance on any vehicles that need to be tracked, product shipments, or any other type of company assets that you might need tracked. We can definitely set up an investigation team for whatever your needs are around that as well. So from an industrial hemp standpoint, me and Sam, my business partner, we really started getting into the industrial hemp and the cannabis industry about 2 years ago. We built some very solid relationships with many people across the state, in Illinois, and actually we have a few businesses that are going to be picking our services up in Colorado as well. So we're definitely building a very, from a brand reputation standpoint, we're building a very strong reputation as far as from building programs from an investigative standpoint, basically recouping losses and making businesses as profitable as they can be. So like Blaine said, in a future call, we will be going into more detail. My director of investigations will be on that webinar, and he'll go into detail as far as what he does, how he conducts the investigations, and basically you guys will have a great understanding of how detailed of an individual he is, and he'll even go over some of the crime statistics, cases. He'll give case examples of cases that we closed out as well. So you guys will have some real-time examples. And Blaine, that is pretty much it.
Okay, so a couple questions for you, I got.
Okay.
I think Christy's, well, I think we almost got her. She's texting me. We're going to try some here in a minute. But one of the questions I have for you is, can you do vetting? If a grower is going to make a sale to a processor or to somebody that's going to buy the biomass, are you able to do the vetting for that and be able to come up, let them know whether that person is going to be able to pay and how good they are?
Yes, absolutely. We can do a very thorough job digging into their background, vetting their reputation, any issues in the past, things along those lines. So we have vetted for other businesses. We have done vetting on large scale contracts. And it's just protecting you as a business owner to do your due diligence and making sure you're doing business with a correct individual.
Right. Yeah, because I know that was an issue last year with some, you're going to ship a semi-load 16, bags of biomass out there. Are you going to get paid or you're not going to get paid, So that's good to know that we have that service available, and that's very good then. Dave, if you want to take over just for a minute, Christy email me something. I'm going to see if I can bring it up.
Okay. All right. Well, let me share with what's going on with the NOCO event. And I'm going to share my screen here. So if you're not aware, yesterday was Earth Day. Happy Earth Day, everyone. 50 years. Let's make it worthwhile and productive somehow in this crazy time. So if you're not familiar with NOCO, is Northern Colorado. They have a big expo in Denver every year. We're supposed to be out there in March. It's been rescheduled to August. I'm hoping that's still going to happen. We'll see. They've launched this virtual platform to have a virtual trade show. So this is the initial screen that you see. There's an expo hall with a number of companies here. And there's people actually behind here that you can chat with the reps, which is kind of cool. We can go back out, and there's content that there was content yesterday, some live content, and that content is available online. So you just go into the auditorium and you can launch that content online. And I'm not sure if these chats are ongoing current. There is a networking section actually, which is kind of cool. So this is connecting, but I'm going to go ahead and back out of here and show you the networking. So, you know, it's all about networking, right? And learning from each other as we're pioneers in this industry. So this, in the networking section, you can see there's people currently talking and sharing information. You know, you can see right here, I shared the iHemp hour link. So a way to engage, and we have to learn new skills, just as we're learning how to grow industrial hemp. We have to learn new skills now to network and share. So this is available to you. And here's somebody reaching out to me. Okay, so
yeah, a lot of great information was able to be shared in the chat room on that yesterday. It was very good. I learned a lot of good things yesterday, and a lot of things that are happening in the future. So our next guest we're going to have is Christy Apple, also known as Crop Scout Christy. She's been working in the realm of agronomy for 12 years. Christy's foundation crop experience has been in the traditional row crops in Michigan. The last several years, however, she has dove headfirst into the specialty crops, the fruit crops, the vegetable crops, consulting for vineyards, hops, and orchards, and more recently has been doing a lot of stuff with cannabis and the hemp growers. She also maintains the agronomy sales leadership role with Tamarack Agro USA, a crop nutrient and biostimulants company. Crop Scout Christy is well known in social media and on farms alike, and she will bring us to some of the practical coaching on how a positive outcome for your farms hemp grows this year. So Christy, thanks a lot for being with us today.
And thank you, iHemp, Mike, Dave, the whole team, Blaine, for inviting me to come and speak about soil health. I really appreciate people taking an interest in this, and I think for whatever reason, hempsters seem more interested in have a higher priority on soil health in their cultural practices, and as they're learning how to do this right the first time, we have a better chance of doing it right in the long term. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of soil health and how it relates to our efficiencies in actually growing the crop in season. And I really want to challenge our thought process on what we define is soil health. I think that it's a large and very broad topic. There's a lot of emotional ties to soil health. There's also a lot of marketing ploys that have been launched surrounding soil health, and we kind of sometimes lose the true context. So we almost think of soil health as a destination, and really it isn't a destination. It's more a methodology than a destination. So it kind of flips the script of how we're going to think about the way that this works. So today we're going to talk about considering our responsible nutrient management practices and how that relates to soil health. We're going to talk about where the plants are growing and the soil microbe interaction there, and then also making sure that your farming practices suit your goals, but also have a keen eye on this positive soil health impact. So I want to talk about the responsible nutrient management principles. This is actually some filters that have been created for us to overlay our yield goals and our cultural practices and come up with some things that make good sense for the environment, as well as meeting our crop protection or crop production goals. So these 4 R's, as we call them, kind of speak to applying the right nutrient source, the right rate, at the right time, and in the right place. So if we can get those 4 things working in tandem with each other, we can sometimes have a much better outcome for both the crop goals as well as, laterally positively affecting the soil quality there as well, which translates into soil health. So we're going to talk a lot more about soil quality and how to enhance soil quality and let that be a measure so that we don't get hung up on calling it soil health and misusing buzzwords that kind of get me a little fired up in the way that they get misused in the world today. So these 4 R's kind of overlay or are affecting our social practices, our economic influences for our farming practices, and also the environmental dimension, which is very complex and really needs to be simultaneously engaged. So you can't really touch one without the other. These things are very integrated. You can't apply something into the soil and not affect the environment. You can't apply something to soil and not affect your plant. It's going to either negatively or positively affect each of those realms every single application we do. So I just want to emphasize that when we're putting our farmer shoes on, our farmer hat on, and recognize how those things are very closely integrated. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trusting our soil to do something. I mean, forests grow without human intervention, right? Our grasslands exist without us planting something on it. So we have to recognize and be realistic. The soil can supply at least some of the required nutrients for life, whether we do anything to it or not. And so, and that is a result of this biodynamic involvement of soil microbes, soil physics, plant physiology, and photosynthesis. So we're going to kind of tie all those things together and walk you through the growing season on how this works together. And then your soil has these certain characteristics that impact all of these things. We're going to talk about holding capacity, and sometimes our soil's ability to hold nutrients will dictate whether we need to apply more or less based on what your soil's potential is. So that's really important for you to capture and understand. You don't have to be an agronomist to understand all of that, but you can consult an agronomist to help you understand whether your soils have enough holding capacity to do something, or might dictate which direction you're going to go with your nutrient applications. And then ongoing soil assessment. I know that there's some soil health assessments that are out there and available. I've seen lots of them over the years. To be frank with you all, I've been doing soil health before it was cool in agronomy. I was viewed as, a hippie 10 years ago when I got started in agronomy, and this was all I could talk about and think about. Well, guess what? Here I am, all these years later, I'm still pounding the pavement, preaching soil health, and it's now a thing, and it's a mainstream ag topic. So it's fun to be a part of this, and having done some ground level work too. Now, I'm not research and development. I'm an agronomist. I make recommendations to the farm. I validate those recommendations in field, and I help the decision tree along. So we want to work with our soil's nature. We're not going to go excavate our farm and create something different. That's not even realistic. So we have to learn about the farm that we're farming and treat it as its own individual entity. So we want to work with its nature, including its holding capacity and texture and other physical properties. But I also want to show you how these things are very interconnected. Yes, your soil is part of the medium with which you'll grow. It is also a living organism in and of itself, and has a ton of subcolonies or sub-organisms within that dictate how nutrients flow and water flows in and out of your plant. But really, this whole process it has one piece that it can't do without. In fact, it can't do without any of the pieces, but the real chain breaker here is going to be the plant in the soil. So the plant grows leaves, they become these giant solar panels. They sometimes will turn with the sun through the course of the day to capture maximum solar energy and transfer that into photosynthesis and create all kinds of other compounds that will then exit the plant through the small root hairs or through the root hair system and start feeding the soil and push that first domino, shall we say, those dominoes into successively falling and creating nutrient cycling, creating other enzymes and other chemical processes that will help to release nutrients. A lot of the waste product for soil microbes actually is the food that our plants so desperately need. Their waste product also becomes a net or a catch system for water. And so the plants rely on these microbial interactions to supply water and nutrients to them because there's only a few ways that the plant can actually absorb nutrition. And so it requires a whole series of things to help support a full maturity through the course of the growing season. And most of this work is done in between soil particles in the soil solution where our teeny tiny root hairs will try to intercept. I'm using my hands and I apologize for that. If I had my slides here in front of you, it would make a lot more sense. But I want to, talk to you about this root development. It's really, really important for us to develop a very prolific hair root structure. Of course, when we're farming, we like to see green above the soil, right? But when you're a soil person like myself, I'm more concerned with what's happening below the soil, because I know that that will support what the potential is growing up above the soil. So we want to develop these wildly prolific root hair systems, which can explore as much soil and soil solution as possible, so that we can increase our chances of getting the nutrients we do apply actually into the plant. The last thing we want to do is apply a nutrient to the soil that never gets into our plant. It has a fate, and that fate becomes problematic in certain scenarios. Some things may jump onto the soil particle because they have an electric charge, a magnetic charge that binds them together. Then a large rain event may wash them away down into the ditch system and into our waterways. That could be things that move very rapidly through the soil profile, like phosphate. Certain forms of nitrogen, like nitrate, can move very quickly through the soil. We want that fate to end up into our plant, right? So this is the whole point of fertility. So that's very important for us to recognize. The soil microbes play a really critical role in the whole process, not just in bringing the plant things, but in breaking down other organic matter that's in the soil or on the soil surface. Eventually, leaves and plant material from past crops or from whatever that was once upon a time is in a constant state of being broken down into other carbon chains that various soil microbes can feed off of. Then their waste product goes back into the system, and it becomes this really beautiful symphony of symbiosis. Now that sounds all very romantic, right? So how does that really translate into something that we can actually use? Well, the reality is the currency there is that food that we've been talking about repeatedly, and that's the carbon link. So carbon can be in various forms, in different lengths. Carbon is what we could consider a general term, but carbon in and of itself has this ridiculous amount of potential to feed absolutely everything on the face of the planet. So we want to leverage that carbon currency to feed our plants by feeding the microbes. We have a role to play there. So our soil health component of this, or our soil quality component of this, is when we are feeding those microbes their waste products. There's different species of bacteria that give off a compound called glomalin. So glomalin becomes a glue-like substance that actually helps to reestablish soil particles of binding together and holding together. Sometimes our soil quality and our soil diversity struggles when we can't hold soil particles together. The water passes through too quick. The soil microbes don't have places to hang out and get established or reproduce. And so the whole system starts to slowly collapse. And so when we can tap into that and we can have happy bacteria that can create these compounds, we can encourage fungi to set up camp there as well, and encourage other protozoa and algae that want to exist there and play a role to do so. And so, you know, when we think about how many microbes are in the soil, it's beyond human comprehension at this time. In fact, some different tools have been developed to try to quantify this. And what they've experienced were these, you know, numbers with more commas than what we can count. It's so vast with all these unique signaling systems or signatures that we can't even recognize. But what we have conjectured at this point is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 billion soil microbes in like a sugar packet size of soil. And to me, that's absolutely mind-blowing, and it speaks to the complexity of this topic, and also to recognize that when we're getting coached on products to use, that we are being realistic about bugs in a jug or pouring certain things onto the soil, thinking that we're going to trigger some magnificent process to just instantly happen. You're putting a handful of bacteria or a handful of fungi into your farm that has to compete with billions of other microbes in just 1 gram of soil. So you're really just a drop in the bucket. And I would just guard you against getting too sucked into all of the microbial additives that are out on the marketplace right now. I believe that there's some value in some seed treatments and things like that that we can affect in the mycorrhizal side, but I'm more of a fan of providing food sources for the microbes instead of trying to add microbes to my soil, and make some sense out of that. Does that, you follow where I'm going there? Kind of like a drop in the bucket. You're probably not going to change a whole lot on the natural balance of those microbes. The things that really does change the balance of those microbes would be like cultural practices like tillage, for example. You're literally recreating the environment that these soil microbes live. So naturally, populations are going to fluctuate, ebb and flow, and maybe even cause some microbe families to go live somewhere else where they're happier with the certain environmental conditions. So soil health in and of itself is a very, very large topic, and I'm trying to condense that into a 20-minute talk here. So if I oversimplify things and it upsets you, I apologize. I've gotten a little some feedback recently on glazing over topics too much, but who wants to sit through a 3-hour lecture on soil microbes? I don't know. I mean, a lot of us went to college before, but I'm not sure what I exactly pulled out of that, to be honest with you. But what I can say is, if we're leveraging data through the course of the growing season, we can sometimes anticipate nutrient pitfalls or respond to nutrient problems within the plant. So if we can get our crop into the plant, we may choose to amend the soil in different ways. Amendments are going to look very different depending on what we're doing. If we're liming, we're going to have some type of calcium-based material to push the pH one way or the other. Sulfur-based materials or sulfate-based materials are going to drive pH down. So if you're selecting a farm for your hemp production this year, you're going to want to look for farms that would test somewhere in that 6.2 to 6.9, maybe 7.0 range for pH. And if you have, this is the farm that I have, and I don't have that pH that I want, there are amendment options that you may have, but recognize that when we're applying lime to a farm or a liming material of some kind, there's a whole series of processes that have to take place in order to get the desired effect. That takes time, it takes weathering, and it takes water. It's absolutely important for you to recognize this does not happen overnight. This is not like a deposit account at your bank. You do not deposit lime into your soil and instantaneously get to withdraw beautiful colas with gorgeous terpene profiles and 17% CBD. Just isn't going to happen. So I just want to keep that real and recognize that's not only in the hemp production world, but that's true of agricultural across the board. All these different agricultural products that we are producing have their own nuances that are associated with that. So keep an open mind there and do what you can. But if you are looking to build carbon or you have relatively low holding capacity in your soil, and you want to build up some of your potassium and phosphorus levels or apply nutrients in general, I would look at a well-composted blend of possibly chicken or poultry litters, maybe blended along with some type of wood ash. I have a really great relationship with a company here in Michigan that's done a beautiful job of creating a hemp blend, Ag Marvels. They're located out of Shepherd, and they can help facilitate a really tailored program of compost. And I'm very pleased with that. And we can get a solidly 50 to 70% of the crop's total nutrient needs in that one blend. But it works in a different way than applying a traditional granular fertilizer. Granular fertilizers typically need water to dissolve into the soil solution and then go through different things till they can ultimately be available to the plant. Composts have multiple forms of nutrients in them, along with a tremendous amount of carbon, calcium, sulfur, magnesium, and micronutrients that we would have to do individual granular fertilizers to capture all of that. So you can do it in both ways. The compost method would allow for organic compliance. It's an OMRI listed or OMRI compliant material. The blend is all OMRI listed materials that are in there. They're blended together and preserve their integrity and have the documentation to be compliant for organic. I'm not sure that the hemp market space is allowing for any type of premium necessarily for organic production, but for those of you that wish to do that, there's some options that exist there for you in your cannabinoid production. There is some cost associated with that and some equipment needs that might be associated with that. And if you want more information on that, you can direct message me gladly, and I can connect you with the people that can answer those questions for you. But why I like compost is, especially well composted compost blends, meaning these blends have already been going through weathering and breaking down, and so there is something available there already for the plant. And I feel like that's very, very important for us to maintain optimal levels of nutrients available for immediately transplanting or around sowing of your seed. If you're going to direct seed, you're going to need something there available for it. So you could consider liquid fertilizer to be applied to the plants after they emerge, but you would want to make sure that those materials are kind of geared for leaf absorption, or you have a formula and you're applying it far enough away from the plant if it's geared for root absorption. So those worlds are very, very different, and there's a lot of choices out there. And so I just kind of encourage you to figure out what you want to do, or talk with somebody that can help you decide how you want to apply nutrients through the course of the season to decide which products are going to be the right ones for you. That conversation can happen without a sales pitch, believe it or not. And you know, it's an honest conversation about what fits my practices so that I get the right material applied at the right time and with the right source so that I can get it into the plant, you know, going back to the 4 R's that we talked about earlier. So, you know, as these hemp plants, after they've been planted and they start to emerge, they have a very unique hunger curve, okay? And this is true of grain and fiber as well as cannabinoid production. Now, each of those hunger curves look a little bit differently depending what our end use is for that crop, and that's mostly driven by genetics. These plants consume certain amount of nutrients in different quantities through the course of its growing season. I'm going to talk specifically about cannabinoid right now, and so that you can understand kind of how this flows and what some of the nutrients that are out there are utilized for. So, you know, nutrition, generally speaking, we don't really want to luxury apply the big N, P, and K, the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. We want to do multiple applications, small dosages, because those 3 can actually interfere with other nutrients being uptake into the plant. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, have this problem with fate, right? The plant can only eat what it can eat. It can't consume everything that we apply. If we do everything up front before we plant, that little seedling can't utilize all of that. So regardless of whether the plant can use it or not, it's still going through cycling processes. And the soil microbes are still breaking things down and making it available. So if the plant doesn't use it, something else will, whether that be weeds or that get moved through the soil profile and off of our target destiny, which would be into the plant. So just some important things to consider there. And then also some of probably the biggest mistake nutrition-wise that I saw in 2019 was the utter complete lack of sulfur, magnesium, and calcium in a nutritional program. And why that's really critical is because that calcium, sulfur, and mag speaks to flavor and fragrance profiles, which are our terpene developments and our mouthfeel and the effects in interfacing with our endocannabinoid system that particular plant is going to have. Magnesium speaks most directly to the plant's immune system to ward off disease and create a defense strategy. When we're short in magnesium, oftentimes we see a very rapid collapse and succumbing to disease. And so that's really important for us to make sure we have an adequate magnesium. And then when we talk about calcium, that really speaks to what in the agronomy world is called turgidity. So what that means is the plant's ability to hold up. So how strong is that primary stem? How durable are those ancillary branches? How durable is our lateral branching off of the ancillary branches? Can we support a cola cluster as it matures, or are we going to split off from the primary stem? Had a lot of triple 19ers last year. Folks that were growing small acreage, they used a bag of triple 19 or 2, very cost effective. They only had, you know, just very minimal cost into fertility, and they had absolute collapse. They had dirt buds. They had problems with every disease you can possibly imagine. And there is a deeper explanation on that type of fertility practices associated with disease and pest resistance, but that's a topic for another day. But I really prefer to utilize those compost blends as our primary so that we can have adequate nutrition as well as feeding the soil microbes the carbon simultaneously so that they don't consume all of my nutrition before my plant can even get to it. So that's really some, kind of keys that I want to talk about there at that pre-plant to transplant and establishment. And so as we get into early vegetative growth and we're starting to establish our little solar panels on this plant, what we really need to encourage is cell elongation and division. And so again, that goes back to calcium and some other nutrients that play a really important role in that. And when a plant or the soil is lacking in those things, that becomes our limiting factor, our lowest stave in the barrel. So everything else may be adequate, but we may be lacking in this calcium. And so our yield potential is going to hemorrhage out the front. So we really want to keep that balance there. And also I really like to use plant extract based nutritionals in the hemp crop, in all kinds of crops, anything that we're going to be producing food or products that are going to be going into the human body. Because there's a really unique interaction with nutrient density when we can tap into this native terpene language that these plants speak. So terpenes aren't just something that makes you feel a certain way when you may be consuming cannabis, but terpenes are used in all kinds of different plant signaling functions in nature. And so terpenes are something that we know about today and our hot topic today in the hemp world because of the pioneers in the marijuana market that have coached and encouraged and brought that education to the forefront. But really terpenes have a bigger role in plant development and the signaling system that we're talking about in our field. So it's really critical for us to tap into nutrients that we can apply to our crops that help to not just increase terpenes within our buds and colas in our trichome development, but also utilize the terpene language to resist disease and to properly uptake nutrients. So I could go on and on about this literally. And but I want to give us some time to kind of field some questions. And because I got a late start, I don't want to miss anybody's questions there. So fire away.
Blaine, you want to?
Sure. Christy, can you see the chat at all on your?
Well, we'll just ask them.
Okay. Yeah, but I just want to know if you can see them or not.
So the first,
go ahead, Dave.
I'll pitch the first one. How's this? Adam Dietrich was asking about carbon powder refined from hemp stalk biomass being an impact on soil remediation.
Oh, so that's really a cool topic. Actually, one of my inspirational motives for wanting to be a part of the cannabis industry is for the bioremediation properties that these plants are said to have. And so my personal opinion on carbon powder specifically, I think is not as significant as I think that there's a ton of potential there. And I'm very excited to see those studies now that we have a couple years worth of hemp out there in this waste product that we can pull off the field and do something else with. I think there's a ton of potential. And I'm really curious to see, I know that there are some areas that have some really horrible pollution issues, Chernobyl, Fukushima in Japan, that have actually had nuclear events take place in those locations, that they're utilizing the hemp plant and studying to see what it's capable of here. So we don't have the scientific backing yet to say we know that this will do this. But Adam, I'm very encouraged and I'm really excited that we actually get the privilege to ask this question, okay? This is a really exciting time to be a part of this, and the potential for the hemp plant to not only have the healing properties that our bodies can receive, but also the potential healing properties that our land and our biggest resource could potentially receive too. So I don't specifically know what carbon powder would do, but I'm excited to see where the folks that are handling that research and development are taking that.
So I got a question, a couple of them actually. One is, so is foliar feeding, better than other methods of getting the nutrients to the plants?
Right, so that's a very common question, Blaine, and I'll answer it this way. It depends. So if I have a soil, I get my soil test back, and I have soil levels that are very high in maybe potassium or phosphate or some other potentially problematic levels for whatever reason, I'm not going to be able to apply a compost material because it has phosphate in it. It has a ton of potassium in it. I'm going to be limited by what my soil tests tell me. So if I find myself in that situation, how else am I going to get the remainder of my nutrients into the plant? So then I need to select a foliar program that can, number one, actually enter into the leaf tissue, which not all foliars can. There's a lot of foliar material out there. Foliar is a basic terminology for feeding the plant tissue. Just because I spray it onto the leaf does not mean that it gets into the leaf. A whole series of hormonal functions need to take place once that actually happens. Plants typically go through a cycle in the course of 24 hours where they open the little mouths on the leaf called the stomate to take whatever is in. They take in air, they respirate, they allow things to exit in the form of gases through that, and they can also take things in through that way. And when we apply foliar nutrition, what happens is we're hoping that the plant will do that within the next 24 hours of our application to actually get into the plant. So I have a farmer growing in West Michigan for cannabinoids this year, and his soil tests have come back extremely high in P and K. He can't apply what he was planning to apply for primary nutrition. So we're designing a complete foliar program for him so that we can still maintain getting the correct nutrients into the plant, but it's requiring a week by week a spray regimen and a recipe for each week as that plant progresses. And then we'll be checking back and continually validating that with tissue and sap sampling to make sure that we're getting what the plant needs. So to say, is one better than the other? That's not really the question. It's, am I applying the right product at the right time, in the right quantity, in the right place?
So last year I used the marijuana grower's Bible to identify nutrient deficiencies, leaf colors, that kind of stuff. Any suggestion you have for people that to use any kind of visual aid, I guess I would say, to identify what's going on in their plants?
I mean, that's probably a good baseline. So if you want to go and diagnose leaf nutrient deficiencies yourself, you certainly can. But I will say that the onset of almost all of the nutrient deficiencies in a cannabis plant, whether you're marijuana production, industrial hemp, grain or fiber cannabinoids, it doesn't matter. The nature of this plant, it starts to express very similar symptoms. And so the progression of the nutrient deficiency will start to distinguish, the discoloration and where it's discolored, et cetera, will start to distinguish it. But it takes a little bit more time to catch that or to be able to identify that in a layman's eye. So what might be a more effective tool is to very quickly sample those leaves, send them to the lab and get a tissue analysis to see exactly what's taking place there. Because very often we could be, in our mind, diagnosing our field with a nitrogen deficiency when in fact it's a sulfur deficiency. But because the onset of those deficiencies have so many similarities, we could potentially make a decision to apply sulfur when really we needed nitrogen, or vice versa. And what happens at that time is the plant is already under stress because of the nutrient deficiency for some reason. Then we just applied the wrong remedy. So now we're prolonging the deficiency, and the plant may now be undergoing significant oxidization. And that means senescing, where it'll start to abort the cells on the leaves start to die off, and the plant has to adjust and overcome. And when it does that, it rifles through its energy and it cycles through the nutrients you've applied, and it goes through this like burst of needing to utilize a whole bunch of material to overcome whatever stress it's dealing with. So I personally prefer to utilize a tissue sample to kind of validate what my in-field assessment is. And you can always contact me. I have a very trained eye to nutrient deficiencies and catching them very, very early. So I'm happy to help, and that's part of the services that I offer as Crop Scout Christie, is some in-field support too. So,
Are there field test kits that a farmer could use to test the plants in the field, or what labs do you use?
so there's several different labs that are approved to do tissue analysis on cannabis. I have a great relationship with A&L Great Lakes in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I have the ability to send samples in there, and then I also make recommendations based on the samples. So the lab is geared to work and interface more directly with an agronomist. That gives the data back to the agronomist, and then the agronomist will be able to help make a recommendation on how we should approach that. Having the relationship with the farmer. As far as farmer-oriented tools, I have seen a couple of apps be developed that measure like canopy density, chlorophyll, success measures, and even some ID. You take a picture of it and it gives you some indication of what might be going on. I'm old school. I feel like boots on the ground are really important. And I just recently developed a relationship with a company that does some remote sensing that can be a resource for that. So I'm in the process of learning more and seeing if that's something that we can bring to Michigan growers this year for cannabis and on a field scale. To do that. There are some tools that you can actually perform an in-field test, very, very costly, up in the neighborhood of anywhere from several thousands of dollars up to $10,000, $12,000. So they're a little bit cost prohibitive, if you ask me, as far as a farmer trying to invest in that when he's just put that kind of money into an acre. So so it's at this stage, I think over time, more and more tools will be developed to be geared for farms. But until I get to prove them out myself, I'm hesitant to make a recommendation at this point on that.
Okay.
I see Tony listed that she bought some equipment, and sounds like, Tony, you can go around and send some. Sounds like you're saying you can send people around to test the fields for the leaf tissue. I'm assuming that's what you're saying there. So, Tony, if you want to put your contact number on there, maybe people can get a hold of you if they'd like as well.
I can address that, Patrick. The question is, if somebody uses a very toxic pesticide on the plant during vegetation or flower, will this toxin show up in the end product after processing, such as the oil, etc.? Okay, so one of the challenges with pest management in cannabis is the regulatory side of things. There are very few approved pest management tools by the EPA who manages that regulation. So what they like to do is they will do a bunch of testing, and because this is a human consumption material, it goes through a different series of human safety testing, and that process can take up to 10 years. So we haven't had 10 years of production to be able to generate the adequate data needed to say, yes, we can use this, or no, we can't use this. If you're talking about toxic pesticides, I'll just say toxic pesticides are not labeled for use on cannabis, period. So please don't do it. And the answer is absolutely yes. You could potentially translate those residues on into your floral material, rendering it unusable and for flower material. And so then your market then has to become an extraction that could scrub that out. There's only a select few of extraction methods that is able to scrub some things out. And we have an entire listing of pesticides that we have zero tools with which to remediate. And so this kind of goes back to, just because somebody used this product on cannabis and it worked, does not mean that it's safe to use for human consumption, does not mean that it's legal to use. The label is the law. So if you do not see hemp on a label, it is not labeled to be used. That's very important for you to understand. And then there's also the morality component of this is, I certainly wouldn't want somebody that I love consuming a cannabis product that could potentially have a harmful residue in it, when they're already immune compromised.
Yes.
So there's not just the legality, but there's also the morality piece of this. I saw a few farms that tried to get away with things last year, and nobody's going to buy your biomass without a COA, and part of that COA is going to be a pesticide analysis. It's going to cost you some money to sell your your biomass to treat or to test your biomass, but that's a really critical test for you so that you can say, look, I know that I am compliant and I am safe. And then that gives whoever is going to be buying and marketing your biomass the freedom to market that into the most profitable places possible, instead of having to be blended off or having to be disposed of because it's got, you know, illegal residues on there.
All right. Thank you very much, Christy. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the iHemp Hour. This is free form, so this is what we committed to it as an hour. So I appreciate all the questions. We'll certainly follow up with emails. If anyone had us any questions, I'd be happy to provide Christy's contact information. She's a great resource and loves to geek out on soil. So is that true? I've heard that from your very own words. And I like Christy's challenge too. I'm just going to share that again, because I think that was so cool, Christy, where she challenges anyone to walk out into a field of hemp and not touch the plant. That, you know, you have to be involved and engaged. So Blaine, you want to wrap this up? A little pitch for the iHemp Midwest iHemp Expo, January 22nd, 23rd. Lansing?
Yeah, we're busy in the planning process for that. Of course, we don't know. Right now, we're planning on a face-to-face expo at this point in time. It's going to be back at the Lansing Center on January 22nd. That's Friday, and it's the 23rd, which is Saturday. We'll be bringing, it'll be a little different than last year's was. We're going to be bringing in a lot of business as well in this one. That's our goal. We got to get the business engaged with us to be able to utilize this crop and to make a use for it. And we're having some great success behind the scenes this year. We're working with them, so I'm excited to bring that in. So watch information on that coming out. Again, it's going to be January 22nd, 23rd at the Lansing Center there. There are some other questions that maybe Christy can answer. We'll put them on there, especially on some of the heavy metals and stuff. You can maybe answer those, and we'll get those to those people. Another thing that we had on the list, what else, Dave? Recipe time. Okay, so I made some hemp milk this last week. Pretty good, like it a lot. Tastes like an almond butter. Really simple. If I can do this, anybody can do this. So if you can see that, that's a cup of hemp hearts, which you can buy at any store right now. Myers, Walmart, health food stores have them. Organically grown ones you'll pay more for, that's for sure, if you want that. And then I didn't put water in here because I'd smell it, but 4 cups of water. So a cup of hemp hearts, 4 cups of water, a couple of tablespoons. Now they chose to use agave, but you can use any kind of sweetener for it. And you can put more or less in as you want, sweeten it to taste. And then just a little bit of vanilla, again, a couple teaspoons of that for flavor on it. And you put it in a blender for 3 minutes. You can strain it if you want, or you can have it with kind of the gritty taste. Doesn't matter either way, but it is really, really good. And of course, good healthy for you. So that's my little recipe for this week. And everybody wants to bring one along for next week, that'd be great. We'll share those.
Yeah, I'll put that on our post in the follow-up, with the recording of this.
Okay. All right. So that's all I had, Dave. Unless anybody else got anything else. Jason, we want to thank you. We will have Jason's contact information and Christy's contact information up so you can get a hold of them. And we thank both of you very much for taking time out of your days to come and share your experience and your expertise with the hemp market and the hemp farmers. So that's all I have, Dave.
All right. Thanks, everyone.